Um, I'm also going to start this morning with a quick poll, 3-question poll. And if you can answer that, and then also introduce yourself in the chat quickly, just your name and position and where you are um, in the state or out of the state, as sometimes happens. And in the meantime, I'm going to just do a quick overview of what we're doing here. There are a couple of new faces, which is wonderful. And first of all, my name is Tora Levinson. I am the Data and Policy Director at Building Great Futures. And today's meeting is on how to build a more seamless system of supports for families impacted by substance use disorder with a focus on opioids. We will be exploring how Vermont is doing to integrate the early childhood and adult substance treatment systems, review recent data trends, and learn about the BVF Substance Use Disorder Project, and discuss some strategies as Vermont prepares for the COVID recovery and rebuilding phase. As there are some new people, I just want to give an overview of the Child Outcomes Accountability Team, which works to improve integration and coordination of early childhood public and private partners committed to the health and well-being of children and their families. The group will inform and monitor progress to ensure that children are healthy, thriving, and developmentally on track from the prenatal period to 3rd grade by promoting and monitoring outcomes in the following domains: physical health, development and educational outcomes, mental health outcomes, and basic needs outcomes. Goal 1 of Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan also promotes the importance of prevention and early identification across the same domains. I am not going through the slide deck on track, but here we go.
Laura, can we pause for a second and just, I know people are joining and I'm helping to admit them in.
Yes.
It looks like everybody has participated in the poll. So just really quickly, let's share those results.
Perfect.
Just take a moment here. This really is, you know, just to amplify the fact that we all know someone who has been impacted by substance use disorder in comparison to these other 2 major chronic health diseases. I think it's compelling that 100% of us participated in this poll and said that we know people struggling with substance use disorder as compared to the other 2. So it's just a way to kind of normalize this conversation and destigmatize that these are people that we all know and love. So that was sort of the intention behind that. So thank you for participating in that piece.
Absolutely, and thank you, Amanda, for interrupting, getting us back to the core of the topic of this meeting. So absolutely destigmatizing that this is so prevalent and that it impacts each and every one of us. Just give you a little bit of information about Building Bright Futures, which holds Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan, which is for the entire state, entire early childhood system. BBF's mission is to improve the well-being of children and families in Vermont by using evidence to inform policy and bringing voices together across sectors and within regions to discuss critical challenges and problem solve. BBF's infrastructure includes a network of over 450 early childhood stakeholders, including this committee and 6 others, moving forward the work of Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan, the VCAP, and 12 regional councils, as well as being mandated by state and federal law to be the Early Childhood State Advisory Council. And one of the key roles is to monitor the system. And one of the ways that we meet this charge is through the production of a range of publications and resources, as well as gathering to and convening to share information and resources and to strategize together to create a more integrated and coordinated system of early childhood. I am going to pass this over to Amanda, who is going to tell us a little bit about why we're focusing on substance use disorder and then introduce some of our guest speakers.
Thanks, Dora. Thanks for grounding us in BBF's purpose. So the focus today on substance use disorder is because we know national data tells us that 12% of children under the age of 18 live in homes with either 1 or 2 parents or 1 or more parents or caregivers with substance use disorder. And we actually know data tells us that youngest children are impacted a little bit more. So with an estimated of 13% for children younger than 3 years. And we also know that early childhood is so critical in terms of development. So that 0 to 5 window really sets the tone and the stage for who our little people become as they grow. So as BBF's focus is on young children and families, we highlighted this area as a critical need a few years ago, and we released a report, a gaps analysis, if you will, which is on our website. And then from that, a couple councils kind of picked it up as a priority on our action plans. And I'm probably speaking to the choir here, but we know that young children are especially affected because sometimes exposure happens during the prenatal period. And then after that, just that idea of building resilience and reducing the amount of toxic stress in the home environment so children can grow, develop, and flourish the way that they're intended to. And we do have a few guests today, and we're going to kick it off with Nicole because I know she's got to bounce out of here by 9:30, and then we'll move to Heidi. And then I'll just do a little bit of sharing because we have a regional specific grant in Chittenden expanding to Franklin Grand Isle. So I wanted to share a bit about that project with you all. So I think we can probably stop the screen share for a moment so we can all see each other's lovely faces. And Nicole, I'll let you introduce yourself and share some of your work, the fantastic statewide work that's happening.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you for inviting me and letting me jump on early in your very packed agenda. Appreciate the flexibility there. So my name is Nicole Rao-Midigi. I am the Substance Misuse Prevention Manager at the Department of Health, embedded within the Division of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Programs, or ADAP, as it's currently known. Excited to see some familiar faces here. And I was just asked to talk about a little bit of the work that I am doing with some of the folks on this line included, which is we have 2 committees or work groups that we've been working on gap analysis with through 2 different lenses. So we have our Intervention, Treatment, and Recovery Committee, as well as our Family Action Work Group. So both of those groups are putting together what we're calling gap analysis, but it's really identifying priorities of those stakeholder groups to see what seems to be working, what maybe is a gap within the state, and some recommendations to address those pieces with the intention to submit those to ADAP and VDH at large, just to inform the work that we will be doing moving forward and acting again as those stakeholder groups for the work related to substance use, but certainly touches beyond just substance use specifically. So I wanted to invite folks, if you're interested, to each of those groups. They are open groups, and we really encourage multiple perspectives. We love having our early childhood folks on. You all have brought a really helpful perspective, particularly for our Family Action Work Group, which focuses on family units, including adult children of folks with substance use disorder, as well as the impact on younger children with parents with substance use disorder, and what that looks like to ensure that we're supporting all Vermonters through this in a very healthy way. I can pop in my email into the chat with the next meeting dates, which are April 28th for the Intervention, Treatment, and Recovery Subcommittee. I should note that one of the priorities of that group is to address childcare in each of the gap analysis pieces for the ITR. So certainly a child wellness and family perspective through that. And our Family Action Work Group will be meeting again on May 5th. So we're in the middle of a gap analysis for each of those, but we encourage additional perspectives and input there. Amanda, did that cover what you were hoping?
Sure. And can you just provide the timeline in which these reports are written and released?
Absolutely. So we are looking to finish our information gathering and initial discussion phase through June, with final reports being developed in July and August, with a submission in mid to late August for ADAP. And that really just corresponds with a lot of the work that ADAP is doing around our system of care and ensuring that we're meeting all Vermonters' needs.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. And we do have some time for questions or connections you all may have for Nicole before she has to head off. I'll pause for that.
Hi, Nicole. I'm Beverly Boget from Let's Grow Kids. And so when you said the word childcare, and of course my ears perk up.
Sure.
And I'm curious about who are the participants in the groups? Who's been a part of this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for our Intervention, Treatment, and Recovery Committee, we have had really kind of a very broad array of stakeholders through that process. So that includes some of our harm reduction partners throughout the state. So some of our syringe service providers, as well as some of our treatment providers throughout the state, our recovery center directors. We have community members who just have a kind of stake or interest in this work, as well as many of our early childhood folks, both on this call and others throughout the state. I'm sure I'm forgetting sectors, but those are kind of our largest sector participants at that meeting. Our Family Action Work Group, the core of that group are individuals whose families were impacted by substance use, but we also have some of similar folks who join that as well from our treatment and recovery and early childhood sectors as well.
Thank you.
I saw a few chats popping up from some of my colleagues at VDH, so I can connect directly with them. It's always great to crisscross in different ways there as well.
Any other questions for Nicole?
And like I said, I'll pop my email into the chat. So if anything comes up for you, feel free to reach out. If you would like, some more details around each of those groups or would like to be invited to upcoming meetings, just let me know.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amanda.
Okay. We're going to move to our next guest speaker, who is Heidi from Lund, sharing some stories from her perspective. And perhaps, Heidi, if you could tell us a little bit about your position and your role at Lund. So I'll pass the torch to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Amanda. So my name is Heidi Weiner. I'm the community case manager for the Kids Apart parenting program. Kids Apart is a program that's based out of the Chittenden Correctional Facility. We provide parenting support and education for our incarcerated moms at the facility. My coworker, Jess Kell, is the program coordinator and direct service case manager for the moms in the building. And being a community case manager allows me to provide direct case management support to the caregivers and kiddos throughout the state of Vermont, where mom is incarcerated at the facility. So we can provide that direct case management services, which could be anything in regard to supporting that child through the impact of having a parent who's incarcerated, all the way up to helping that caregiver meet their own needs in order to be able to best care for that child. I don't have exact numbers right in front of you, right in front of me. I can tell you my caseload typically with caregivers is about 60% of all folks providing alternative care for children with an incarcerated parent are grandparents. More often than not, they are the maternal grandparents. Sometimes they're the paternal grandparent. We can also very often have siblings that are not being raised together because they do share different biological parents. So we may have siblings with one maternal grandmother and then with another maternal grandmother, or maybe with dad. So we're also looking at trying to best support the relationships between these children if they're not able to be consistently together or raised in the same household. As you can imagine, when you're providing case management services to folks, each have their own very specific needs, but when we're talking about working with populations of folks raising young children who as grandparents can range in age from their 40s all the way into their 80s. And I do have 2 caregiving great grandmothers at this point in time. So really looking at what specific needs arise within those families, whether it's attention to medical concerns, food security, housing, and one of the biggest challenges I see with a lot of the grandparent caregivers is really being able to meet sort of the social emotional needs and maintain the connections between home and school that will best support this kiddo in being successful. And our incarcerated moms come from all over the state. So I'm working with families from north to south. And one of the things that I will highlight, I'm not sure exactly where you guys focus your work, but there is an incredible disparity in services and resources from region to region in the state. What families may have access to in Chittenden County and maybe Rutland County is not available in Windsor or potentially Orleans or even Franklin Grand Isle at times. And looking at the very specific sort of strengths within each community, as well as what the challenges are in the community, is definitely very, very eye-opening when trying to ensure that kiddos' needs are being met. So while we provide that direct case management services to the families of incarcerated women, our program is available to support service providers in supporting families where there may be an incarcerated dad. So while I can't do that direct case management, if you're working with a family or know of families that are struggling because dad is either coming and going from the family due to incarceration or is about to be released and the family's trying to figure out really how to manage that, we're available to go ahead and let you know what we know in regard to best practices and language that can be used with kiddos and putting a safe plan in place to be able to talk about where dad was, what's going to be the same now that dad is out of the facility, and what's going to be different. So that's a little bit of what we do. And what I would love to do is send along a 1-pager afterwards that hopefully folks can have, and that will have my information and Jess's information if you do want to reach out to us. So I think one of the things that Amanda had followed up with me on is I had been speaking with one of her colleagues and done a presentation that was focused on the impact of trauma on incarceration and community reentry. And in doing that, we have to really understand who the women in the facility are, what they have access to, where they're coming from, what they're presenting with. So some of the information that I was able to share during that presentation, some of the data was collected through a program called DIVAS that's based inside the facility, and that is part of the Vermont Network Against Domestic Violence. So the most recent survey that DIVAS had done of the women inside the facility, 96% of the women inside the building had been witness to or victim of domestic violence or sexual violence or human trafficking. For the majority of that 96% of those women, it was a combination of all three. So we're looking already at an incredibly high rate of trauma within the building. 75% of incarcerated women in the building are survivors of domestic violence and have histories of severe physical abuse by a partner. And there had been data shared about the high percentage, and I didn't capture that for today, the high percentage of women who disclosed domestic violence occurrences within the 12 months of them coming into the facility. So this is not where we're looking at an issue where many of these women, that's part of their history. This is part of the current relationships and how things are going in their lives. And then 82% of those women suffered serious physical or sexual abuse during childhood. And what we know about these women is when they show up in the correctional facility, they're coming in without any type of treatment or healing of the aspects of that trauma. And one of the trainings that I do for a lot of folks, we start with an ACEs training to really understand, what those adverse childhood experiences are, how they impact social emotional development, physical well-being, and then healthy behaviors into adulthood. Talking about the ACEs that these women are presenting with, if they're landing in the correctional facility, and out of all of the women in the correctional facility on any given day, 76 to 86% of them are parents to minor children. We know we have an enormous group of children out in our communities who have at least that very one ACE of having an incarcerated parent. And when we know incarceration is present, we know that other risk factors are incredibly likely. So as we can see, domestic violence, sexual violence. I did not write this down, but I know one of the last in 2015, when Jill Evans was in her role with the Department of Corrections with Child and Family Services, she had done a poll, and 36% of the women who had entered the building during that time had diagnosed mental health illnesses. So that may sound high. I find that high because the fact that the women had already been diagnosed prior to coming in, these more often than not, the population of women inside the facility are not those that have had access to or chosen to access any type of interventions or supports. So the fact that the number was that high that we know who do have a diagnosis was pretty surprising. We believe the number is closer to 70 to 80% are presenting with some type of considerable mental health concern, whether it's post-traumatic stress disorder or other disorders that they might be presenting. So thinking about how all of this will impact children in their safety, their healthy development, their behavior development. The other thing that I focused on during that presentation specifically was understanding how survival skills that have kept a woman alive in the community are not the same skills that allow them to be healthy in the community. So survival skills such as lying, such as taking things that are not theirs, such as leveraging power, allowing themselves to be, that's not the right language, being victimized in order to get their needs met. These are not healthy behaviors that are going to keep any of these women safe or well in their communities. When these behaviors come into the correctional facility, it's a prime environment for honing and not addressing and determining what can be done instead of these necessary survival behaviors. So when we think about, we bring our women into the correctional facility and then they're released back out, regardless of why they're there, how long they're there, what type of supports are they being released to and with. And we know since November of last year, so this has been 4 months now, 13 women who were released from the facility have died of overdoses. We had 5 consecutive weeks of coming in on a Monday morning to a DOC email listing yet another woman who had died of an overdose. And one weekend, there were 2 women who had passed. So when Jess and I are working with these women and getting to know them as mothers and women and sisters and daughters and all of these pieces of who they are, and getting to know their children and working with their caregivers, it is quite frankly terrifying when we see a release date approaching, because these women are being released back into the communities that are not prepared for the very specific and intense needs that they have. And we're losing them at a crisis rate at this point in time. So that was a piece of what I think, Amanda, that you might have heard and that you were hoping to have shared some of that data. I do want to say I spent a little time last night on the Vermont Agency of Human Services webpage, and I was looking at sort of to see the difference between 5 years ago and now. So I was really looking from 2014 to 2019 because the pandemic has really skewed a lot of the data that's been collected. And the increase in reports to DCF in regard to risk of harm and neglect concerns versus what we would have seen 5, 10, 15, and 20 years ago in regard to physical violence concerns, sexual violence concerns against children. I remember working for Prevent Child Abuse Vermont, and at the time talking about how neglect was very rarely reported because it was more difficult to substantiate. And now we have children who are so routinely put at risk or so concretely identified as being neglected that that's the highest incidence of reports that are coming through. And in 2019, and I did write this down because I thought it was important, in 2019, 32% of all reports to DCF here in Vermont were from educators. So the way it was broken down on the page was educators, even though their mandated reporters were separate than the mandated reporters. So 32% of all of the reports that were coming to DCF were coming from educators. We know during this past year, our educators have not had consistent access to our families at all. So if we were to sort of predict what we're going to see in the next year or two with kiddos coming back into their community schools and their adults having access to them, I think we're really going to be looking at crisis level numbers of children who have had to live through experiences and circumstances that as a community, we're really, really going to need to address. 13% of reports in 2019 were by non-mandated reporters and 7% were by other mandated. And I found it really interesting, 12% came from law enforcement. So again, if we're looking at 12% of the reports that were coming to DCF are coming from law enforcement, you can absolutely know that there has been a trauma impact for that child and family if law enforcement has been involved to the point of identifying the need to make that report. Those are, I mean, for me, those are staggering numbers. And then the other number I'll just give you is Vermont's numbers on any given day. We have about 6,000 children, and I believe that number is eking up, 6,000 children who have one or both parents incarcerated. Nationally, 1 in 18 children, 1 in 27 children nationally have a parent who's under some form of correctional supervision. In Vermont, it's 1 in 17. So we do have a problem here. And the problem is happening to our kids because the response to the adults in our community struggling is to put them in jail. I know, Amanda, you had mentioned maybe giving, sharing a story or maybe a what if. for folks to give context. I know I've taken quite a bit of time, so I'm happy to do that, or if folks have questions, or I'm happy to stick around and answer questions afterward.
Well, I don't thank you, Heidi. And I think it's so important to shine a light on incarceration and the impact for parents, caregivers, children. The stories and the stats that you just shared were extremely compelling. So I think maybe just taking a moment here to pause to see if others have questions. Just time-wise, I want to keep listening to you speak because you've got a lot of great information to share, and I'm grateful that you're here with us today. So let's pause for questions and wonderings for a moment.
Renee?
Yeah, not a question. I just want to reiterate, Heidi, how fantastic it is having you here in this virtual room today to share all of that information. As someone, my prior life, I was an ED of a domestic and sexual violence organization in Vermont, and this is so important. And so I just want to kind of reiterate that, the bridge with the statistics you were sharing about the number of women incarcerated who had experienced domestic violence, who would come in with mental health, with diagnosed mental health conditions, to just say, like, the correlate with all of that is substance misuse, right? We know that substance misuse is how those folks are coping. And I also think this is an opportunity for us when we're thinking about equity and the way that we are addressing substance misuse, that there needs to be particular attention paid to women specifically who are struggling. And not to say that men don't need support, absolutely. But when we think about the impact and the intersections between these issues of domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking, mental health, and substance misuse, and the impact that has on our youngest Vermonters, it just gives me goosebumps and gets me kind of worked up. So I kind of just want to call to this group to think about that as we're continuing the conversation of around equity and what are we doing specifically to support these populations. And I, of course, doing my job, I just have to put a plug in for Head Start programs, and just wanting to make a connection. Again, you talked about access across the state. I wish we had Lund in every corner of the state to do this kind of work and to support these women. And just, something to keep in the back of your mind is, like you're saying, those staggering numbers about women when they're released, and how scary that can be. And just to encourage as much as possible, if you are working with those moms and those kiddos, if you can connect them to a Head Start program, because they'll find community there. They'll find other parents who are struggling with similar issues. They'll find kiddos who have similar experiences and can really develop those peer relationships. So just thinking about that as a resource, because we know that childcare is important, but I think with Head Start, it really is about those comprehensive services. So it is another important safety net that those kiddos, in addition to getting good, high quality learning and care, that family gets wraparound services. They have access to mental health clinicians. They have access to, if they need transportation or any of that. So just wanting to put a plug out there that the more of those connections we can make and create those safety nets for those very, very vulnerable women and kids, hopefully we see those terrifying numbers start to decrease. But thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. I've been in this position just over 6 years. Of all of the women and families that I have worked with during that time, only one woman inside that building her family that I worked with, can I accurately say that her crime and her sentence were not related to any sort of substance use offense or her own disorder. One person in 6 years. So every other family that I have worked with, I kid you not, there has been an aspect of criminal activity that revolved around someone's substance use, abuse, or disorder. And that was the other thing I'd written down that I'd wanted to make sure to say is that one place where I keep finding myself having to start when I work with a new group, especially if it's really hands-on direct service providers, is really trying to relay that the difference between substance use, substance abuse, and substance dependency. One of the biggest problems that I run into with sometimes, and some of my biggest heroes are school-based staff. There is still this perspective out there that someone who is experiencing substance use, substance dependency is out getting high, that this is a recreational activity that they're choosing not to stop. We know this is not accurate. Whatever caused someone to engage, explore, experiment, whatever that looks like, and we know more often than not that that's trauma, or a lot of times a sense of escapism or relieving pain of one type or another. These are not moral failings. If we keep treating people like they're not worthy and that they're the cause of their own problems, if you only knew the story of some of these women, and again, I agree with what I heard someone say earlier, it's not just the women. Our program is focused on women, so that's really where our experience right now lies. So that's why we speak so much to what we know. We need gender-specific, trauma-informed practices inside the facility, outside the facility, and from front to back.
Thank you, Heidi. How about we take one more question? I did see Bev's hand up for a moment. Bev, did you have something?
Well, this was just eye-opening for me. And so thank you so much for sharing that in such a way that was really clear and a little more than a little frightening, because I don't think a lot of us know that world quite that way. And that was really helpful to bring that to our forefront. I'm curious about other parent-child centers, and are they doing similar work? Because it seems to me this feels really important and could maybe be more widespread around the state. And I just don't know where it's available.
I love the way you think. So our Kids Apart program is one program that's located at Lund. It had originally come over about 10 years ago from Vermont Children's Aid Society. So the program and support has been available, I think, for about 13 years now. And Jess, my coworker Jess, has been with the program. Her institutional knowledge of the trends that we've seen over the years between our incarcerated moms, trends inside the facility, and then what we're seeing in the community is invaluable. So if we really do want to look at what's helping, what's not helping, we do have a lot of that history to be able to share with communities. One of the things that I get asked repeatedly is why can Lund place their residential treatment centers around the state? Because we know best practices is for folks to get support and treatment in their communities, to be closer to the natural supports that we can hopefully build with them. We seem to have a very effective residential treatment program that operates right here out of Burlington. I go to the Northeast Kingdom, and I just remember having a social worker literally pulling on my arm saying, is there any way that you guys can get a residential program up here? She said, we'll look for grants, we'll buy an old farmhouse, who cares if it only holds 6 women, but we need something here as a resource that we have for our families. So I think this is a long answer to a short question. So the short answer is Jess and I are it. I can promise you, you will not find a more dynamic duo out there in regard to advocating for the moms that we get to work with, the families that we get to work with. There's nothing I love more than when I'm talking with community members and able to share stories of real progress and real turnaround we've seen, because there are always heroes attached. Those heroes typically include that one person who won't take no for an answer. When, well, we don't have this, we can't do this, and they're not going to get up from your office and leave until there is a plan in place. The other heroes that I 100% have to mention are classroom teachers and school-based clinicians and social workers. Some of those, again, these are folks who are not going to take no for an answer. They know that these children are coming into their building on any given day and are going to need from them the extraordinary, and they want to be able to do that. And where we have really seen children turn the corner from carrying a go bag with them because they've experienced homelessness, the abrupt absence of a parent, overdoses in their community, being able to put the grown-ups around that child in control of his safety and his wellness to the point where he was beginning to feel wellness and safety. The more collaborative relationships that we can build with the natural existing supports in the community. I'm a graduate of Woodbury College, and I was really taught to believe and still believe that these resources exist. They exist within our communities. It is a matter of coordinating, getting folks on the same page, and working together. Because if we're working in our silos, we're going to be missing pieces. That's where we're going to find those gaps. That's where we're finding gaps right now in regard to the systems where these women are being released, or they're being released. And again, I'm speaking to what we have learned when women are being released from the correctional facility to a 3-week residential program and then return to the community. I'm sure there are aspects of a 3-week residential treatment program for some of these women that may be beneficial. When 3 weeks ends, they're going back to their communities, and the trail of case management gets broken. And the trail of support gets broken. So Jess and I really want to advocate for more transitional parenting and family supports as women are leaving the facility and coming into their communities. It's difficult with just the two of us doing all of the work of this program. So when we do find those partners, and I know my go-to people in certain communities throughout the state. So I love building those relationships because it definitely impacts our children in an amazing way.
And we will have time in a few minutes to start to brainstorm and strategize together as a group. So thank you for that segue. I do see Amy Johnson's hand up. So Amy, why don't you pipe in and then we'll move along after that, just being cautious of time here for everyone.
Amateur hour. I just want to pipe in, and just to Beverly's point, and Heidi, I really appreciate everything that you added, and I'm definitely going to reach out and make a connection and see where any gaps might be in Franklin Grand Isle that we can support. But Beverly, I think that it's, Lund is a parent-child center that the rest of the PCCs often consult with to get support, because they do run a robust program that supports families with substance barriers. And we all had the Cures grant, which is something that all PCCs were supporting. So we were doing UNCOPE screening. So that was a lot of the Children's Integrated Services staff that were doing those screenings and referring to strengthening families groups or nurturing families groups. I would say across the PCCs, we're all doing something different connected to substance use supports. And so if you want a list of what it looks like across the state, I can gather that information for you. And I think what's also pretty neat is that our Dulce program, so we have 5 Dulce sites across the state of Vermont, and so we're looking at integrating the UNCOPE screening tool into that program. And we've worked with the national team. I say we, but it's Scott Johnson and Brina. I've worked with the national team to get that kind of approved, and so we'll start to be integrating that tool. And as a reminder, that's this is somebody from the PCC embedded in the pediatrics, supporting all families, birth to 6 months. So, doing that screening and then being able to plug families into supports. And I think, again, to Heidi's point, it's really important for us to work together. Can you type in the name of the screening tool? Yes. I think that it's important for us to continue to connect and build relationships and talk to each other when we're identifying gaps, because if we don't know what they are, then it's tricky to be able to develop that programming to better support families. So just again, really appreciate, Heidi, everything you had to say.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy, for bringing in all of those other critical pieces. So there's so much work that's going on. And, you know, I'll play that. How do we integrate? How do we align our efforts? How do we ensure that everyone knows what's going on? Is the constant struggle, right? And I did want to share a little bit about the project that's happening that's spun out of the Chittenden Regional Council. So I'll hop back into screen share for a moment. And I also wanted to show some compelling data to kick off that conversation. So I'm not sure folks here on this call or in this meeting have heard, but there is a centralized call center / website similar to Help Me Grow. So I know we're all familiar with that, called Vermont HelpLink. And coincidentally, this was planned to launch in March, you know, unknown to them at the time that was COVID. So their data really does span for this period during COVID. So they don't have anything to compare their data to. And at the moment, they're not asking people who call or enter the site to note or signal that they're a parent or a caregiver, but they're looking to shift their questions to include that. And they're actually launching a caregiver specific page. So I bring that up because I know that we all have resources that could be added to that page, like Amy Johnson was just speaking about, and Heidi, your program should definitely be up there. So it's just a potential point of intersection for all of us. But I heard Brina last month, and I wanted to kind of dig in some data here to highlight that the substances reported in 2020. So of course, this data, like I mentioned, is from March of 2020 to December. But look at the alcohol use. And again, you know, is this just because people feel comfortable saying that they're using alcohol as opposed to other substances? I'm not sure, but I thought that was striking. And then Vermont HelpLink does make referrals. So on the right-hand side is kind of the list of the referrals that they're making. So that outpatient service and residential services pieces are the most popular, if you will. So I just wanted to kind of ground ourselves in a little bit of data, knowing that a subset of this data is parents, and we don't have that specific grouping here, but we can make some correlation. Okay, so a quick overview. I'm not going to read this all because I do want to get to the fun part where we get to discuss and brainstorm together and use our collective brain power. But we do have a grant through the UVM Medical Center through their Community Health Investment Fund. And we're in the second year of our grant, hoping to apply for a third year. And really the heart of the program is integration and coordination for the children serving sector and the adult serving sector. And we are, you know, noticing that parent supports, caregiver supports are kind of a high need. And, you know, while we'd like to focus on everything and anything at once, we have kind of structured our grant and strategies under 6 goals. So I wanted to share those goals with you. So goal 1 is that we do convene a monthly community of practice meeting. So it's separate from the council because it takes a lot of time and energy. There's a lot of crossover, but there are some additional partners who come to the community practice meeting that don't sit at the council table. So again, sort of, you know, one of our main functions here at BBF, breaking down those silos and working together. Coordinating parenting support. So there's a broad array of parenting supports. Now, of course, most of them are in the virtual space. So how do we coordinate, incentivize, and promote community-based programs and provide choice for families so that they are comfortable where they land and perhaps have, you know, a natural connection there. So Champlain Valley Head Start is a leader in some of those programming. Turning Point is a big partner there. Prevent Child Abuse, and then Parent Child Center. So Amy from NCSS, who's here again today, sits at that table, and they have amazing parenting support programs. So we're really trying to build alignment and choice for families. Childcare, of course, comes up as a big goal. So that always comes up as an issue. And how do we establish referral pathways? So something that we noticed in our community of practice was that adult serving treatment providers weren't aware that there were amazing resources on the ground, like our referral networks. And in Chittenden County, it's Child Care Resource. And I know that looks different in other counties. But right now the focus was to kind of to push and promote their services to the adult treatment folks. So they know that that's aware, and they know that's around, and they don't have to spend time and energy doing that work. Goal number 4 is trainings. So we're developing training opportunities. I'll give Renee a shout out. She just brought an amazing Train the Trainer model to the state of Vermont in February, which some of us connected to this program participated, and a bunch of other people around the state. And Renee, maybe you can fill us in a little bit later, but really the intention is to reduce stigma, build common language. And we know that our caregivers and educators, like Heidi mentioned, are seeing and are concerned about these kiddos. And we want to give them the tools so that they can have those conversations with families. Parent engagement. So ding, 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 that's a big BBF piece, as it is for most of our other partners here today. So working across settings to capture the true needs. So as we look forward with this grant into year 3, we're taking time right now to pause. We launched a caregiver discussion tool, and we really want to check in with families to see what they're experiencing, what they're needing, how things have shifted during COVID, and ensure that our priorities and the funds that we pour into this grant into the community next year align with the true needs. And then the last piece is, of course, communication and outreach. So how do we tell people what we're doing? How do we expand the knowledge base? How do we connect with other programs that are doing similar work so that we're all on the same page? Just a little snapshot of 2020 impacts. There's a quote there on the left-hand side from a CIS provider. But we know that kids and families are struggling right now. We know that virtual relationship building is key, but it's also challenging, especially with inviting new families to participate. We know that data tracking right now is also challenging. So some of our data pieces aren't truly representing the need because some of those families aren't connected to any services right now. And again, we know that family voice is critical to inform our new strategies, and trying to gather input is high on our priorities. And I did just want to mention, of course, we always bring the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So being kind of based in Chittenden with expansion to Franklin Grand Isle, we have a lot of new Americans in our communities, and how do we ensure that our work, reaches them in a way that's accessible and they feel safe in those environments. So this is sort of lesson learned at the moment. And as we look ahead to year 3, we are watching alcohol use because we know that's increasing. I did want to bring up COGS. Numbers are down, and COGS is the clinic connected to the UVM Medical Center that serves pregnant moms. We had a case manager come to one of our meetings, and she needed help with communication and outreach, like, hey, this program still exists. Our model is a little bit different because we're virtual, but they've had some concerning situations where moms have come, into labor and delivery, never have been connected to prenatal care, nor enrolled in, or connected to MAT, so the medication assisted treatment. So that's an area of concern to watch. And then the DCF numbers seem to be going down, and that's due to less eyes, I think, on the kiddos and families. And as we're preparing for COVID relief, what is that going to look like? How can we shore up our systems so that we're ready to wrap around these families who have been struggling during this period? And of course, that's connected to workforce capacity. So no big surprise there. I'm gonna go ahead and stop screen share to see if you guys had any questions for me because I was talking super fast. Thank you. I see Brina.
Mute.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Brina.
Thank you so much for everybody this morning so far. Super inspired by Heidi and also Renee. I like the way there's people's professional lives intersect over time, over the trajectory of a long Vermont employment. So, you know, I feel like my job always with us and other groups is to do the whole population as we also think about other, you know, groups of families within different service provisions. So when you look at a whole population of Vermont's new families or, you know, families of pregnant women and postpartum, it's a completely different demographic that are drinking, and which is a good reminder that everyone's struggling. So this idea that we're used to certain public health socioeconomic slices or wondering about the impact of poverty as we always should. We just don't want to take our eye off the fact that the people drinking are actually middle class, educated, and over 35. So it's a maternal age, post-secondary education group that are, frankly, as a healthcare professional, getting the wrong advice here. That it's a little touch of the alcohol is no biggie. So in the chat, I included the PRAMS data brief about this. That's the Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring System, which is a CDC-funded 2-month postpartum survey of a random sample of Vermont's women. I think at this point, 48 states do the PRAM. So when I say we have the highest rate of drinking in the country, it's just among those 48. But it is astounding and glaring. And I could, I couldn't find it easily, but there's one of those graphs that shows every state. And it's like Vermont, and then like when you get down to Utah, like no one's drinking in pregnancy. So something's wrong. And then I did want, we launched a campaign, I think it's called One More Conversation, which is for healthcare professionals to just slow down and have one more conversation about substances in pregnancy, slow down and talk about alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, as well as opiates. So let's see what you think of that. I put that in the chat. And then the last thing I wanted to say, it's a very complicated world. You've all described the complexity so much, but when you parse data in public health about tobacco, in the reproductive age woman category, it's all the same women that are experiencing anxiety and depression. So as much as we need to focus on different things and do our work, it's also important to remember, as Heidi noted, like root cause and try to see the substance as a symptom rather than get off. Like smoking cessation is a great example. Like we get so focused on like quit attempts and quit lines, and that's all very evidence-based, and it does help sort of general populations. But when you're looking at subsets of people that have experienced violence and trauma and depression, that has to be addressed. You can't just say, have you tried quitting today? So there's a little, that might get me in trouble with some of my tobacco cessation colleagues, but I'll stop there. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Brina. And I do think, yeah, there's so many pieces. So I think in that vein, let's start a discussion. So I am going to bring up this slide share one more time, just so we can look at the guiding questions here. And then maybe Dora, you could also pop them in the chat so people have them in that way too. So I'll screen share for a moment so we can read through them, and then I'll take the screen share off so we can see each other and have a productive conversation. Okay. So yeah, we're curious. As an early childhood system, what do you know, or what have you learned about today that can inform strategies to create a seamless system for families impacted by substance use disorder? with the impact of COVID. Obviously, we heard today some anecdotal reports that less people are coming in for treatment and services. So what might happen as in-person services resume? And the other question, what other data, so Brina, thank you for sharing some data, or key questions can we ask to help inform our work as we move forward? I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share. Oh, thank you, Dora. And if you have the hand raising function, I don't have that on my Zoom. You may use that, or we can just sort of have a natural conversation.
I might also just add that if there are resources, I mean, I've learned about a bunch of things already this morning. And so if there are things that should go up on Vermont Help Link, or if it should go up on our BBF resources page, or you know, making sure that we know both about the data, but also the resources that are available. We can either talk about those in the discussion, or, you know, feel free to send them and we can distribute them.
Thanks, Dora. So what are folks thinking? Maybe we can center around that first question.
Hey, Amanda, this is Lauren. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. And I was actually looking down when you had those questions up there, but I think that this is probably related to at least one of them. I just wanted to kind of, I don't know, name the challenge around some like our fear-based, I think, reactions and fear-based mechanisms that exist within our systems. And I think that, you know, the statement that was made earlier around, you know, these families and these individuals who are struggling with substance use, abuse, dependency, with these histories of trauma and mental health conditions, if our communities, if our society is viewing those folks as unsafe and unworthy, our systems are designed to treat them in that way. So I know everyone's, you know, has been commenting on the complexity and what a big issue this is. And this has certainly been a longstanding challenge. It's been a focus area for so many of us on this call and so many of our partners and our stakeholders in early childhood. And we've struggled to move the needle. And I think, you know, I keep coming back to this idea around, you know, our justice systems, right? And how, if we really want to dig into root cause and how to support these families, it's really thinking about a huge transformative shift in our systems and a transformative shift in our mindsets around how we think about folks who are struggling with these issues. And something else that comes to mind, having worked at Lund for several years, right out of my master's program and supporting those women, was one of the most challenging, one of the hardest jobs I've ever had. And it totally changed my perspective and my views and the way that I think about substance use and mental health. And one of the things that has always been a huge challenge there, and for folks that have worked in direct service with and supported these families know this to be true, is the fear around losing their children. So especially for women, you know, these women are, you know, I love the concept of these survival skills, right, is what has allowed them to survive in their communities. And those things don't translate necessarily to the community. They also don't translate all the time to parenting. And that doesn't mean that they're not putting their children first, or that they don't love their children any less than one of the other community members, right? But the fear of losing their child really gets in the way of building those relationships. When I think about family engagement and how are we listening to families and engaging families who are struggling with these issues and getting authentic and honest feedback to inform our systemic change, that's a huge challenge, because how likely are you to share information when you fear that your child will be taken away. And I know that that's, not always based, it's not always realistic, or it's not always, an accurate perception, but that is a fear. And so it is very, very real for folks who are finding themselves in this situation. And it certainly colors a lot of the, engagements and interactions and relationships and behaviors and communication that I think those folks can have with peers as well as service providers. So yeah, just to say, this is, it's been a really thought-provoking conversation. And I think, as we're thinking about coming out of COVID and recovery from COVID, I'm noticing this thread of like major transformative shifts that are needed for equity. And this topic is certainly, I think, reflective of one of those huge shifts that is going to have to happen if we really want to see true change.
Yeah.
Lauren,
Go ahead, Heidi.
Lauren, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that I had wanted, I'm not on mute. Okay. One of the things I had wanted to say was that we have so many women that cycle in and out of the facility. I often don't close out my case management with caregivers when a woman leaves the facility. Before I can close her out at 30 days or 60 days, she has typically returned to the facility. And it's heartbreaking for everyone involved. It is yet another failure in her, to check off in her column. And one of the reasons why so many of these women end up returning to the facility is they're returned on a violation of conditions, which means that many of these women will not have resorted to using their drug of choice, engaging in opioid use. They may have been smoking marijuana, they may have been drinking, and they may have been doing those things with the wrong people or in the wrong place or at the wrong time. And it's a violation, and they come back for that. Yeah. And they come, and it's interesting, they come back heartbroken because this is the same sanction that they would have received had they been doing heroin. Right. So, and again, we're watching this cycle for these children, for these caregivers of coming and going. The other piece, I think back, and this sort of will date how long I've been doing this work. I was responsible at one point in time for helping coordinate the Bridges Out of Poverty trainings throughout the state. And the work that Ruby Payne did with integrating and embedding case management and practical accessible supports in the environments where folks were bringing probation officers to larger work sites so that folks were not having to leave to go check in, to bringing courses and required programming to those places where folks can easily access it, not get sidetracked. And there can be some safeguards around who is lingering near some of these classes, groups, and programs. Inside the facility, and I talked about this in the presentation I did a couple of weeks ago, you can't have that many victims gathered in one place without developing some phenomenal folks, developing some phenomenal predatory skills in some of the folks around them. And again, this is said through the lens of considering significant mental health concerns that some of these women may present with, and also survival skills. One of the wittiest, most articulate, well cared for women we had in the facility was one of the most profitable drug dealers in the Northeast Kingdom, and supported a number of people off of the work she did, and she never used, and that the skill of being involved sort of in that life and with folks like that, and having access and having that money to burn, and no other real accountable folks that she was accountable to, again, is a skill that other folks may not have. So really being able to bring person specific, need specific. I worry a lot of times that this resources and supports we're putting in place, they're really through a lens that does not take into account the complete intersection of addictive behaviors, addictive personalities, mental health concerns, trauma, and poverty. And then the other piece that I want to say, so that I don't forget to say it, is we have an incredibly high number of women in the correctional facility who are not even able to understand their DCF paperwork. They're not able to understand their court paperwork. They're getting armchair lawyer, advice inside the facility. And, as though that's not bad enough, the disparity among the state, not only in services, but in criminal justice responses to certain behaviors, certain crimes, certain activities is incredible. So there's also the system is showing these women that there are, to an extent, there are no rules. When the rules are different, or when the rules are applied differently in so many places, it can compound the feeling that the world is out to get me. These things are happening to me.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm hearing, we always ask this, who is missing from this conversation? Sounds like it would be really great to talk to folks at DCF to see what they're hearing, what they're experiencing, and also the criminal justice system too. And I know KidSafe is launching, I believe in April, a pilot program for the court system. So it's a case management model that any family connected with DCF that enters the court system has a wraparound case management supports. They're setting goals, they're connecting to community-based programs that can support their variety of needs. So I know that that's the first time something like that is coming to Vermont, and perhaps we can just keep our eye on that and glean any lessons learned and hope that funding will come. And if it works well, that it's a program that can expand. So other comments or thoughts? And I know this is such a complex conversation. I see Amy's hand up, so go ahead, Amy.
I'll put it down later. So I appreciate Lauren and Heidi, what you brought up around that stigma piece. And it made me think, we did a study a few years ago for some funding that was coming through the legislature. And we asked PCCs directly or peripherally, the families that you're working with, how are they, are they impacted by substances directly or peripherally? And it was nearly 100% of everyone's caseload. And it made me think around that stigma piece, and that if you're a direct service staff working with families, like, what's your level of knowledge? Like, you have a lot of tools in the toolbox, you have, a variety of skills to be able to support families. And it makes me think about kind of the necessity for, I don't want to say mandatory because that's kind of a weird word for me, but some specific ongoing training that is required of direct service staff if we know that children's integrated services staff or home visiting PCC staff or Head Start, etc., are going to be working with families who are directly or peripherally impacted. Then they really need to have that deep understanding of how to support those families, what is going on, the complexities, that kind of intersectionality that folks were talking about. And I know, Renee, your group brought that training to the state, which was awesome. And I think there are just so many more people that need that deep level of training and understanding. And how do we prioritize that? How do we make sure that that's, on our radar? I just feel like it needs to be said that I was talking to somebody who works in this Vermont direct service world, and my partner is in the recovery community, and they said, oh, you can be friends with somebody in recovery, but you shouldn't date somebody in recovery. And that, to hear that from somebody that works in the field, it just really blows me away to think that, like, I know that you're a smart, knowledgeable, supportive person for families, but if that's the mindset that you're going into homes with, what does that mean for the families that you're supporting? So I just think that, among so many other things, that training piece for staff is so crucial.
I would love, Renee, for you to jump in, so go ahead.
Oh my gosh, I love this group. Like my Thursdays are crazy and really tough days, but this is a fantastic group to connect with because you get all my creative juices flowing. So a few things, all of this talk about stigma is so spot on, and I can get contact information, but I want to share a resource that popped up through the intervention, treatment, and recovery team and the family work group team. It's a man called Ed Baker, and Ed Baker does his own consulting and presentations around stigma. I think he has his own YouTube channel that he does, but I know that we connected I have to think of Southwest, the Bennington Head Start program. Their family service workers heard a little bit and learned a little bit about Ed Baker and invited him to actually present to their staff and their families in a combined training on stigma. And just the feedback that I've heard anecdotally from program staff down in Bennington was remarkable. They had some amazing discussions with staff. They were really exploring those assumptions, exploring the ways that those assumptions and that stigma impacted the way that staff were delivering services. They heard from family members directly about the impact of stigma and how that impacted whether or not they access services. So I'll try to find that contact information, and Dora, I'll send it to you so you can put it in the notes. But Ed Baker has said over and over again in those meetings that he is willing and available to present to anyone who welcomes him. So I will share that information. I do think, Amanda, to your point around who's missing, the criminal justice system in this conversation is so key. And so, we're talking about child outcomes. We're talking about the number of Vermont kids who have incarcerated parents. I think it's very important for us that we get some representation from the criminal justice system. And then, I don't know, I've got a long list next to me of like all these things I was writing down, but I think there was a TEDx talk, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but the thing that stuck with me was the opposite of addiction is connection. And Heidi, I heard you talk about that piece of addiction. And so I think if we really want to be successful in supporting families, it's about connection between us as service providers and providing that net, but also ensuring that families have those strong connections, because that really is the key to overcoming addiction. And then, I will just share a little bit, really excited that I finally did the tally. We have 61 people throughout the state. They were CIS folks, they were Head Start folks, they were, we had PCC folks on there. A whole network of 61 folks throughout the state that were trained trainers on, substance misuse 101, basically, in supporting families. Those folks have been tasked with going back to their communities and developing a training plan. Who needs this information? How do we get it to them in the best way possible? So if anyone is interested, like Linda, the chat has gone by now, so I can't see, but I saw you had a comment. You're like, yes, we recognize that early childhood educators are in need of this information. So if anyone is saying, yeah, we need more information about this, please be in touch, because I can connect you directly with the folks in your region who received this training and did so with the expectation that they would provide a training to their community within the next year. So those folks are out there, that network is there, and please contact me, because we know that our communities need this information, and I want to make sure that it gets out to those folks.
Thanks, Renee.
So I just want to jump in for a second. I realize it's 10:20 and we had hoped to have some time for announcements, but this is such a rich conversation. I wonder if there are announcements, if people can put it in the chat, unless if you feel like there's something that you really want to share that's coming up, please feel free to raise your hand and have that in there, or interrupt or unmute yourself. But otherwise, if you can put announcements in the chat, that would be great. And then we can continue. Maybe Chad, you can go ahead.
Hi, my name is Chad Vijay. I am the Executive Director of Recovery House. You might know us as Serenity House, Grace House. Was invited to this group meeting today by ADAP, and I appreciate the invite because this has been just an incredible amount of information that I was not personally aware of. One thing that I'm very interested in is creating bridges. And when it comes to parents and children, admittedly, I don't think we're as aware as we perhaps can be about the resources that are out there that we can help connect people to once they leave our programs. One thing that I would welcome is if anyone was interested in meeting with my team down here to discuss resources and supports that are available that we might not be aware of. The other side of things, I would open myself up to be a resource for anyone who is interested in learning more about service side of things in terms of residential treatment or whatever it might be. I welcome that. We are in Rutland County, but we service the entire state.
That's great. Thank you. We're so glad you're here today.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that people would appreciate if you put your email or contact information in the chat so that we can reach out to you and make some of those connections.
Any other thoughts or reflections?
I am curious about the connection between the Help Me Grow Resource and Referral Center and HelpLink.
Me too. I don't have the answer. That's a great question.
Lauren, do you have some information about that, or is that something that we can follow up with?
That's actually the first that I've heard of it. I had made a note to follow up, and I don't know if Elizabeth, I think she was on, I don't know if she's still on the call, if she has more information, but I also learned something new today and think that that's a great place to explore connections and overlap, and if we can have some, create some synergy there if it's not already.
Wonderful.
Hi, this is Elizabeth. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. HelpLink does have a connection to Vermont 211, who, as folks know, is the Help Me Grow Resource Center's partner. So we've certainly been able to share information with HelpLink about Help Me Grow, and we certainly have information about them. They are part of our resource database for families that call us and are looking for services related to their substance use. So that's currently the kind of the extent of our connection with HelpLink.
Just because I talked to the program manager, and I'll be sure to connect behind the scenes, Elizabeth. Mariah Ogden is the program manager for Vermont HelpLink. And I know that they're working to stand up a parent specific page. So I just urge anyone on this call, if we want to provide input or a list of resources, I think they're eager to get that information. And as they stand up the page, you know, I'm sure they'll be able to add and expand that as it gets going. So thanks for bringing up that piece.
Thank you for sharing that, Amanda. I do want to let you know we shared our Help Me Grow materials with her, and I know that they're working really hard, so I would encourage anybody to reach out to her and share those materials so she could get that page up and going.
One of the things that strikes me is we're trying to create sort of like a system and simplify things for people when things are very complex in terms of getting help. I just love this idea of remembering that we have these centralized resources and that we only need to remember like a handful of things And then those can be the keepers of the continually changing and updating information. And so, rather than educate everybody about every resource, like I just keep thinking that's a lot of information for us to try and all hold.
You just have to remember to have people make sure that the information is updated and accurate. Because if somebody calls, like, I know I talked to Elizabeth and she's amazing, and I still have not sent her our information yet. But because we haven't given everything, it's not on there yet. So I think that's great and amazing. It just, there has to be, people have to remember to update those systems so that the information is accurate for when families call. I'm just always going to put that plug in. So like, spread the word, tell people to update their stuff. And I'll do it too.
With the caveat that I missed the first almost half hour of this morning's presentation, Heidi, I'm looking forward to going back and listening. There's a recording, I think. Yeah. But so I don't know if this was mentioned, but the Improving Care for Opioid Exposed Newborns, that's part of VCHIP's cadre of programs. I used to work with that program. They do a conference every year in the fall. And I was just looking and seeing that the 2020 ICON statewide teleconference has recordings, presentation slides, resources. So on everything from implicit bias, caring for women with opioid use disorder, collaboration and inclusion, and the Vermont plan of self-care. So I can put the link in the chat, and looks like there's information coming soon on this fall's conference. I don't know if there's a cost, associated with it, but it looks like at least for last year's stuff, which is, 6 months old. And one of the things that I think that group did over and over and over every year in these conferences was to address implicit bias by bringing a speaker to that conference who had themselves struggled and could speak to that. And every year in our evaluations, it was the most powerful part of the meeting for people. So anyway, I'll put that link in the chat.
Thank you so much. I realize we're coming up on our time, and I am so grateful. This has been such a wonderful and rich conversation. I do want to just encourage, there are a couple of new faces, and so I would encourage you to continue coming to these meetings, we haven't necessarily been focused in some of our other meetings on substance use disorder, and especially around incarceration and all of the links that we've talked about this morning, and having you and your expertise at this virtual table is huge. And if you are able to make the time or to attend whenever you can, it would really be wonderful, a wonderful addition. So I think Amanda, do you have any closing comments?
No, just that our next meeting will be April 22nd. And the topic of focus for that will be around food security.
And I will be releasing we will be sending, having the recording of this meeting up on our YouTube channel shortly. Thank you all.
Everyone.